the desperate plea in a small, forgotten village on a distant planet. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the dusty streets. A young girl, no older than 16, stood in front of the crowded market, clutching a worn piece of paper. Her face was streaked with tears, and her clothes hung loosely from her thin frame. The girl, whose name was Lila, was desperate. She had no other choice. Lila's family had fallen on hard times. Her mother, once a strong and lively woman, was now bedridden with a sickness no healer could cure. Her father had disappeared years ago, leaving them with only the small, crumbling house they lived in. The little money they had was gone, and the food had run out days ago. With no one to turn to, Lila had resorted to the only thing she had left: her mother's cooking. "Please make an offer for my mom. She cook you delicious meals." Read the sign Lila held up, her handwriting shaky but clear. She had written it herself, the words her only hope for survival. The smell of her mother's food had always been the only thing that brought people together in their small home. Everyone who tasted it said it was the best they'd ever had. But now, there was no one to buy it, and no one to care. As she stood there, waiting, the market bustled around her. People walked by, glancing at her for a moment before quickly turning away. They were too busy, too preoccupied with their own lives. No one even stopped to look at the girl with the sign. Lila's heart sank. She thought she had done everything right. She had offered the only thing her family had left, the one thing that might save them. But the world felt cold, indifferent to her suffering. Tears began to blur her vision. She wiped them away angrily, trying to stay strong. There had to be someone out there who cared. There had to be someone who would help. The sun was almost gone now, casting the village into darkness. Lila could feel the chill in the air, but it wasn't just the cold that made her shiver. It was the fear that no one would come, that her mother's sickness would take her and there would be nothing she could do. Lila couldn't bear the thought. She was all her mother had left, and if she failed, what would happen to her? She stood in front of the market for what felt like hours, watching as more and more people passed her by. Every time someone glanced at her, her heart skipped a beat, hoping for a moment of kindness. But every time, they just kept walking, lost in their own world. Lila began to feel invisible, as if she didn't matter. Then, just as she was about to give up and go home, something unexpected happened. A man approached her. He was tall, with dark hair, and a weathered face that spoke of many journeys. His clothes were not the typical attire of someone from the village. His jacket was made of strange materials, and his boots were sturdy, like they had walked through many dangerous lands. He didn't look like he belonged in this market, or in this village. The man stopped in front of her, looking down at the sign. He glanced at Lila's tear-streaked face, then back at the sign. For a moment, they just stood there, the sounds of the market fading away around them. Lila held her breath, unsure of what was about to happen. Was this the moment she had been waiting for? Was this man going to help her? How much for a meal? The man asked, his voice low and calm. His words were simple, but to Lila, they sounded like a lifeline. She blinked, surprised by his question. No one had stopped before. No one had shown any interest. Was he serious? I don't know, Lila stammered. She wasn't prepared for this. My mom, she's very ill. She used to cook for people, but now, she trailed off, not knowing how to finish the sentence. How could she explain the hopelessness she felt, the weight of her situation? The man looked at her for a moment longer, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded. "I'll take you up on the offer," he said simply. "Lead the way." Lila's heart skipped a beat. This was real. This man, this stranger, was going to help. She could hardly believe it. She had no idea who he was, or why he cared, but she wasn't going to question it. All she knew was that this was her chance. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. She couldn't help it. The tears that had been threatening to fall all evening finally broke free. She wiped them away quickly, not wanting to seem weak, but her gratitude was overwhelming. The man gave a small smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. He turned and began to walk with her, his pace steady. As they walked, Lila's mind raced. Who was this man? Why was he here? And what was he going to do for her mother? She didn't have the answers yet, but she knew one thing: this moment had changed everything, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a flicker of hope. A stranger's arrival as Lila led the man through the winding streets of her village. She couldn't help but steal glances at him. He walked with purpose, his movements precise, as if he had been on countless journeys before. His eyes, sharp and calculating, scanned their surroundings, though he said nothing as they made their way. Down the narrow alleyways that led to her home, the world around them felt different now. The one-stell streets seemed alive with the sounds of the night, distant voices, the rustling of leaves in the wind, the occasional flicker of light from the nearby houses. But to Lila, everything felt muffled, as though the noise was coming from a far-off place, far from her world. Her heart beat faster with each step. She couldn't understand why this man had appeared at that exact moment. Nothing about him seemed to fit with the dusty, poor village she called home. "Thank you," Lila said again, though her voice trembled. Her mind was racing. Was this really happening? Or was she dreaming? This man's presence felt too surreal to be real. No one from her village had ever offered to help her like this, and no one had ever looked at her with such calmness, like he knew things she couldn't even begin to understand. The man didn't respond right away. Instead, he glanced down at her with a small, unreadable smile, the kind that seemed to suggest he knew more than he was letting on. "Don't mention it," he said finally, his voice deep and steady. "Just show me the way." Lila nodded, leading him through the crumbling door of her family's small home. Inside, her mother lay on a thin cot in the corner of the room, her face pale and drawn. The room was small, only a few pieces of old furniture scattered around, barely enough to make it seem like a home. The kitchen was no better. A small stove and a few mismatched utensils were all they had left. But it was here, in this very room, that Lila's mother had once prepared meals that filled the air with warmth and comfort, bringing people from the village together to share stories and laughter. The man stepped inside, his eyes flicking around the room before he focused on Lila's mother. He didn't speak, but his gaze lingered on the sick woman for a moment longer than expected. Lila could feel the tension in the air. She watched him closely, wondering what he was thinking. Her heart beat faster, uncertainty filling her thoughts. Who was this man really? "This is my mom," Lila said, her voice shaking. She was the one who used to cook for everyone, but now, she stopped herself, feeling a lump form in her throat. The man nodded slowly, his gaze still fixed on her mother. "I see," he murmured, then turned to Lila. "How long has she been like this?" 4 weeks, Lila replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "No one has been able to help. The healers say there's nothing more they can do." She couldn't hold back her tears any longer. They fell freely down her cheeks as she continued, "I don't know what to do anymore. I can't lose her." The man's expression softened slightly, but there was no pity in his eyes. Instead, there was something different, something Lila couldn't place. He walked over to the small stove and began to inspect it with a critical eye, as though assessing its worth. "You said she cooks," the man said, his voice low but purposeful. "Show me what she used to make." Lila was caught off guard by the question, but she nodded and moved toward the stove. Her mother had taught her how to cook years ago, but she hadn't had the strength to cook in weeks. "It's just simple food," Lila said as she began to gather. "A few ingredients, some old vegetables, a small piece of meat, a few herbs." The ingredients weren't much, but it was all they had. As she worked, she couldn't help but glance at the man. He watched her with quiet intensity, not speaking, but his gaze never left her. It was as though he was studying her every movement, learning something deeper with each passing second. She felt uneasy under his stare, but at the same time, she couldn't help but be curious. There was something about him that seemed out of place. Something about him made her feel like he knew more than he was letting on. "Why are you helping us?" she asked suddenly, her voice trembling. "You don't even know us. You don't owe us anything. Why are you here?" The man remained silent for a moment, his gaze still fixed on her as she worked. Then, finally, he spoke, his words measured and calm. "I help those who can be of use to me. I make deals. And in return, I expect something in return." Lila paused, her hand hovering over the pot she was stirring. "Something in return," she repeated, confused. "What do you mean? You're asking for something from me?" "Not yet," the man said. "But when the time comes, I'll ask. You'll know when. For now, focus on the meal." Lila didn't know what to think. This stranger, who had appeared out of nowhere, had already said more than enough to unsettle her. What did he mean by deals? And what would he want from her when the time came? She couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter wasn't just about her mother's health. There was something bigger at play, something she didn't yet understand. As the meal simmered on the stove, the man stepped outside, looking around the small village with a sharp eye. When he returned a few minutes later, he spoke again, his tone different, more serious. "This place is more dangerous than you realize," he said. "There are people who would do anything to see you and your family destroyed. You're not just in danger from sickness. There are others watching you." Lila's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice tight with fear. The man's expression darkened. "I'm not sure yet," he replied, "but you need to stay alert. I'll help you, but you have to trust me." For a moment, the world seemed to stand still. Lila didn't know what to believe. This man, who had come out of nowhere, now claimed that they were being watched. She couldn't make sense of it. But deep down, she knew one thing for sure. This was no ordinary stranger, and her life was about to change in ways she couldn't even imagine. The meal was ready. Lila set the table, her hands shaking. As they sat down to eat, the weight of the moment settled in. This wasn't just about food anymore. It wasn't even about saving her mother. There was something more at play, something far bigger than she could comprehend. And as the stranger took the first bite, Lila felt a chill run down her spine. Whatever came next, she knew their lives would never be the same. The room was quiet, except for the crackling of the small fire that burned in the hearth. Lila set the table carefully, arranging the simple meal she had prepared from the meager ingredients available to her. The smell was comforting, reminding her of better days, when her mother had been healthy, when she used to cook for the villagers who visited their humble home. Those days seemed like a distant memory now, a faded dream in a life that had become nothing but struggle and survival. The man sat at the table, his posture straight and alert, though his eyes softened as he looked over the meal. His sharp features remained unreadable, but there was a flicker of something in interest, a curiosity, hidden behind the calm facade. Lila wasn't sure if it was the exhaustion from her long day, or the weight of her mother's illness, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The air seemed heavy with anticipation, as though this meal was more than just food. It was a test. Lila placed a small bowl of soup in front of the man and set one before her mother, who was still lying on the cot, her frail form barely visible beneath the thin blanket. She was too weak to sit up, but Lila's heart swelled with love and pity as she gently lifted her mother's head and placed the spoon in her hand. "You need to eat, Mom," Lila whispered, her voice quivering. "Please, just one more bite." Her mother, her once strong and proud figure, barely responded. Her eyes were glassy, and her body was too weak to even hold the spoon steady. Lila fought back tears as she watched her mother struggle to take the small spoonful of soup. She knew the food might be too little, too late, but it was all she had to offer. The man didn't speak as he watched this exchange, but Lila could feel his eyes on her, studying every small movement she made. It was as if he was taking in every detail, every gesture, as though he were trying to understand more than just the simple act of eating. "How is she?" the man asked suddenly, breaking the silence. Lila glanced at him, startled by the directness of his question. She swallowed hard before responding, trying to steady her voice. She's been sick for weeks now. No healer has been able to help her. I've tried everything, but nothing works." The man's expression softened for a brief moment, but it was quickly replaced with the same unreadable mask he had worn since arriving. "I see," he said, his tone oddly detached. "And you believe that food will heal her?" Lila's breath caught in her throat at the question. Of course, she didn't think the food would heal her mother, but she had nothing left. "I don't know," she murmured, wiping her tears away. I just thought maybe it would give her some strength." There was a brief, uncomfortable silence, and then the man finally spoke, his voice surprisingly gentle. "It might not heal her, but it may buy you time, if you're willing to take that risk." Lila frowned. "What do you mean?" The man leaned forward slightly, his eyes never leaving hers. "There's something about you, something in your heart. You've been holding on to this hope, this belief that anything can save her. That kind of determination is rare." Lila could feel the weight of his words hanging in the air. She didn't understand what he meant, but there was something in the way he spoke that made her feel as though she was at the center of something much larger than herself. It was as if this meal, this moment, was not just about feeding her sick mother. It was about proving something. "What do you want from me?" Lila asked, the question slipping out before she could stop it. She knew the man was offering something, but she had no idea what it was. For a moment, the man didn't answer. He stared at her, his gaze intense and unwavering. It made Lila feel exposed, as though he could see through her, into the depths of her fears, her hopes, and her vulnerabilities. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and steady. "I want you to trust me," he said, "and when the time comes, I'll need you to make a decision. But for now, all I need is your faith and a little patience." Lila blinked, confused. Faith, patience. What did he mean? And what was this decision he kept talking about? She opened her mouth to ask, but before she could speak, the man stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. His movements were so fluid, so precise, that it was as if he had done this 1,000 times before. "I'll be back," he said abruptly, turning toward the door. "Don't worry about her for now. She'll be fine." Lila opened her mouth to protest, to ask him where he was going, but the words caught in her throat. Before she could utter a single syllable, the man was gone. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving her alone in the dimly lit room with her mother. Lila stood there for a moment, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. What had just happened? Who was this man? And why had he come into their lives at this exact moment? She turned back to her mother, whose condition seemed no better than it had been when the man arrived. The soup remained unfinished, her mother's strength draining with each passing moment. But Lila could feel something change in the air, as though the man's words had somehow altered the course of everything. What decision was she supposed to make? And why had the man asked for her faith? Was it just about the meal, or was there something more that lay hidden beneath the surface of this strange encounter? Lila didn't have the answers, but one thing was certain: she had just taken the first step into a world far beyond anything she had ever known. And whatever came next, she had a feeling it would change everything. Her heart pounded as she sat back down beside her mother, staring at the door. She couldn't explain why, but for the first time in weeks, she felt a glimmer of hope faint, but there. And that hope made her believe that the stranger, and whatever mysterious path he had set them on, could be their salvation. But was it really? Or was it just another trick of fate? The uncertainty weighed heavily on her as the night drew on. The hours passed in silence after the man's sudden departure, leaving Lila in the dim, flickering light of their humble home. She had sat beside her mother for what felt like an eternity, but the room had grown colder, the shadows longer, and the air heavier with each minute. Her thoughts swirled around the stranger's words, his cryptic promises, and the odd weight of his presence. What did he mean by faith? And why did he leave so abruptly without saying what he truly intended to do for her mother? Lila's mind raced, but there was no clear answer. She couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, that this strange man had set something into motion, something she couldn't yet understand. She glanced at the fire, its flames dancing low, barely flickering, in the silence. Her mother's shallow breathing was the only sound filling the room. Lila's heart ached as she gently placed her hand on her mother's forehead. The fever was still there, unrelenting, just as it had been for weeks. No matter how many times Lila prayed or begged for help, nothing seemed to change. The healers had long given up on her mother, and Lila had reached the point of exhaustion, both physically and emotionally. But now there was this man, this stranger. The doubt in her mind wavered between confusion and the faintest hope. Could he really save her? Could he truly offer something that no one else could? Suddenly, the door creaked open, breaking the stillness. Lila's heart skipped a beat as the man entered again, his presence filling the room like a force of nature. This time, he carried something with him, something wrapped tightly in cloth. He looked different now, more urgent, more intense, as if the calm demeanor he had once held was slowly slipping away. Lila stood up quickly, her pulse racing. "You're back," she whispered, not sure what else to say. The man nodded without a word, his eyes scanning the room before they landed on her mother. He didn't seem surprised by the condition she was in. Instead, he moved toward her, setting the bundle down on a nearby table. "She hasn't gotten better," Lila said, her voice filled with desperation. What are you going to do? You said you could help her." The man looked at her, his gaze firm, unreadable. "I can help her, but in order to do so, you'll need to make a choice." Lila's heart skipped a beat. "A choice," she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "What kind of choice?" The man slowly unwrapped the cloth he had been carrying, revealing a small vial filled with a dark, thick liquid. The sight of it made Lila's stomach turn. It looked foreign, alien even. The liquid seemed to shimmer with an unnatural glow. "This," the man began, his voice steady, "is a serum. It's a rare substance, one that can heal your mother. But it comes with a cost." Lila stared at the vial, her mind racing. She had no idea what this serum was, but her instinct told her it was dangerous. "What cost?" she asked, her voice trembling. The man's eyes never left hers. "In exchange for the healing it will provide, your mother will owe something valuable. But what is taken will not be returned. And once this choice is made, it cannot be undone." Lila's breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean, something valuable? What will it take from her?" The man's expression remained stoic. "That is something only she will know when the time comes. The balance will be restored, but at a price." He placed the vial on the table and stepped back, giving her space to think. "I cannot say what it is. You must trust the process." Lila's mind swirled with a million questions. Was this a test? A trick? Or was it the only way to save her mother? She took a step forward, her hands shaking as she reached out for the vial. "Will this really work?" she asked, her voice raw with emotion. "Will it save her?" "Yes," the man said, his voice low and certain. "It will heal her. But you must decide if you are willing to accept the price." Lila's mind was clouded with doubt and fear. Could she trust him? Could she trust anyone in this cruel world? She had already lost so much. Her father was gone, her mother's health was deteriorating, and the village had abandoned them. She felt like the weight of the universe was resting on her shoulders, but she also knew that if she didn't act, her mother would slip away from her. This could be the last chance she had to save her. She looked down at the vial again, her eyes locked on the swirling darkness within. It felt like a lifeline, but also like a dangerous trap. I don't know, Leela whispered, her voice breaking. What if the price is too high? What if it costs her everything? The man remained silent, his gaze unwavering. That is the burden of choice. It's yours to make, and no one else can decide for you. The room seemed to close in around her as Leela stood frozen in place. The vial shimmered on the table, its contents calling to her, promising salvation. Her mother, lying so still in the corner of the room, was the only thing that mattered now. Leela had to save her, but at what cost? Please, she whispered, her voice shaking. I just want my mom to be okay. The man's expression softened for a moment, but only for a fleeting second. You'll have to make the choice soon. Time is running out. Leela's heart pounded in her chest as the weight of his words hit her. Time. There was no more time to waste. Her mother's life was slipping away, and the stranger had given her the only way to save her. But that way came with a cost that Leela could not fully comprehend. I don't know what to do, Leela said, feeling more lost than ever. But I can't lose her. The man nodded slowly, his eyes darkening with a strange intensity. Then you know what must be done. Leela reached out, her hands trembling as she picked up the vial. It felt heavier than it should have, as if it were holding the weight of 1,000 decisions. Her fingers brushed against the smooth surface, and for a brief moment, she felt the stirrings of something ancient, something powerful, coursing through her veins. It was then that Leela understood. This was not just a choice between saving her mother or losing her. This was the beginning of something much larger, something that would alter the course of their lives forever. Without another word, Leela uncorked the vial, the liquid inside shimmering in the dim light. She had made her choice, and with that choice, everything changed. The mission Leela stood motionless, the vial of glowing liquid in her trembling hands. The dark serum swirled inside, its presence like a promise and a threat all at once. The air around her seemed to shift, charged with something electric, something that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. The man watched her closely, his gaze unwavering, as if he were waiting for her to take the final step, to cross the threshold between the life she knew and the unknown world that awaited her. Are you sure you want to do this? His voice broke through the silence, steady and calm, yet carrying an edge of something urgent. Leela barely heard him. Her mind was racing, her heart hammering in her chest. She had made the decision. There was no turning back now. She had to save her mother. Whatever this was, whatever price had to be paid, she had to do it. There was no other option. With a shaky breath, she uncorked the vial, the dark liquid glowing faintly as it filled the air with an almost intoxicating scent. Without another moment of hesitation, she lifted it to her mother's lips, the action instinctive, born of desperation. For a brief moment, nothing happened. Leela held her breath, waiting. The seconds stretched into an eternity, and she felt a knot tighten in her stomach. Had she made the wrong choice? Had she just sealed her mother's fate? And then, suddenly, her mother's chest rose with a deep, shaky breath. Leela gasped, her heart leaping in her chest. Her mother's eyes fluttered open, the dullness gone, replaced by a spark of awareness. Double quotes, Mom, Leela whispered, her voice breaking as she gently cupped her mother's face. Her mother blinked, confusion clouding her eyes. But there was life, their real life. Leela, what happened? Her voice was weak, but it was a voice Leela had longed to hear. It was a miracle. Before Leela could answer, the man's voice rang out, sharp and commanding. We don't have much time. You've made your choice. Now, you have to follow through. Leela turned to him, her heart still racing. Follow through? What do you mean? She's awake. She's not fully healed. Not yet, the man interrupted, his tone serious. This is only the beginning. The serum may have saved her for now, but there is still much that needs to be done. And there's more you need to understand about what you've just agreed to. Leela's eyes widened. What do you mean? She turned back to her mother, who was still blinking, trying to adjust to her newfound strength. What's going to happen to her? What is this cost you keep talking about? The man stepped closer, his voice lowering, as if he were speaking to someone who needed to be prepared for something that was beyond them. You've just agreed to take part in a mission that is bigger than both of you, and it's not over yet. The serum is only the first step, but the price is far more than you realize. There are forces at play here that you cannot begin to understand. Lila's heart pounded in her chest as the man's words sank in. What do you want from us? She demanded, her voice trembling with both fear and anger. What have you brought us into? The man's eyes darkened. You're already in it, whether you want to be or not. You see, your mother's illness wasn't just a coincidence. It was a signal to someone or something much bigger than either of you. Something that has been watching you for a long time. Lila's breath hitched. Watching us who? What are you talking about? The man's gaze grew even more intense. The galaxy, Lila. The universe itself. There are powers, ancient and dangerous, that seek to control everything. And you've just opened a door to something far more dangerous than you can imagine. Lila felt her knees go weak. She had come into this with only the hope of saving her mother, not realizing that she was stepping into something far darker. She had thought the serum was the answer to her problems, but now she realized that she might have just opened a Pandora's box. But why us? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Why me? Why my mother? The man's expression softened though. There was a hardness in his eyes. Because you have something they want. Your mother's gift, the ability to heal, to restore life. It's rare, and the people who have been watching you, they will stop at nothing to possess that power. Lila's mind reeled. What do you want from me? She repeated, her voice cracking. The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned to look out the window, his face unreadable. I want you to join me. I need you to help me stop them. You're the only one who can, now that you've been marked. Lila echoed, feeling a chill run down her spine. The man turned back to her. Yes, the serum has marked you both, whether you realize it or not. You've chosen to walk a dangerous path, and now there's no turning back. You'll be hunted, you'll be pursued, and it's only a matter of time before they come for you. Lila felt a wave of terror crash over her. Her thoughts were in chaos, and she could hardly process everything he was saying. I don't understand. We're just two people. How can we stop them? What am I supposed to do? The man looked at her with something like pity in his eyes. You don't have to do this alone, he said softly. I'm here to guide you, but it's up to you to decide if you want to fight back, or if you'll let them win. Your mother's healing is only the beginning. What happens next will determine the fate of everything. Lila's head spun. She had thought this was all about saving her mother, about making sure she could survive. But now, she realized that her choice had led her into a far larger struggle. The fate of the galaxy, the powers that be. She couldn't comprehend the weight of it all, and yet, one thing was clear, she couldn't go back. Whatever had been set in motion by the serum, by her choice, had already started. The journey she had unwittingly embarked on was bigger than her, bigger than her mother, and bigger than anything she could have imagined. Lila looked at her mother, who was still weak but now alive, and she knew that whatever came next, she had to protect her. They were no longer just victims of circumstance. They were players in a dangerous game, and if they wanted to survive, they would have to fight for their lives, for the truth, and for the fate of everything. The man was right. The decision had been made. There was no turning back. The mission had begun. Betrayal. Lila's heart was a drumbeat of uncertainty. The man's words echoed in her mind, reverberating with a strange, unsettling truth. She had opened a door that could not be closed, and there was no way of knowing what lay on the other side. They were being watched by forces older and darker than anything she had ever imagined, and now she was marked. She and her mother were now part of something much larger, and though the choice had been hers, the consequences felt more like a curse. The stranger, who had become both an ally and a haunting mystery, had taken a step back from their lives, giving them space to prepare for what was coming. But his absence had only left more questions in its wake. Lila couldn't understand the weight of what she had done, and every day that passed, she felt a growing sense of dread creeping into her bones. Her mother was awake, yes, the serum had worked, but there was something unnatural about the way she regained her strength. She was still weak, but the color had returned to her cheeks, and her once frail body was beginning to regain some semblance of its former vitality. Yet, there was a coldness in her eyes, a look that Lila couldn't quite place. It was as though the miracle of her healing had come at the expense of something else, something deeper. Lila spent her days keeping her mother comfortable, but every time she looked at her, she couldn't shake the feeling that the woman lying in the bed wasn't entirely the same. There was a distance in her gaze, an unreadable expression that unnerved Lila to her core, as though her mother, for all her physical recovery, was slipping away from her in some other way. One night, after a long day spent caring for her mother, Lila found herself standing at the edge of the village, staring into the dark horizon. She was alone, her thoughts heavy with the uncertainty of their future. How much longer could they hide? How much longer would it take before the forces the man spoke of found them? Would they be safe? Or would they be torn apart before she could even understand what was truly happening? As she stood there, lost in thought, the sound of footsteps echoed behind her. A chill ran down her spine. She had become hyper-aware of every noise, every rustling of leaves, and every shadow that crossed her path. Her hand instinctively reached for the small dagger her mother had once kept hidden in the folds of her clothing. The village, though quiet, felt increasingly dangerous. The man's warning still rang in her ears. They will come for you, and when they do, you must be ready. Turning slowly, Lila faced the newcomer. It was the stranger, the man who had promised to help her, who had given her the serum, and who had promised protection, but something was different. He was alone now, his usual air of control replaced by an unsettling tension. His eyes flicked nervously to the side, as if checking for an unseen enemy. His hands were clenched into fists at his sides. "You shouldn't be out here," he said, his voice tense. There was something off about him, something that set Lila's nerves on edge. "I could say the same to you," Lila replied, her voice cold. She had grown weary of the mystery surrounding this man, his cryptic words, his promise of help, and his sudden departures. It was all too much. She needed answers. Now the man took a deep breath, his eyes darting around again before he spoke. "They're coming. They found us." Lila's stomach twisted. "What do you mean? They found us? You said we were safe." "You said I lied," he interrupted. The words cut through the night air like a blade, and Lila's breath caught in her throat. "I should have told you the truth from the beginning, but I thought I could protect you. Protect both of you." Lila's heart pounded, and she felt a cold anger begin to rise within her. "You lied?" she whispered, her voice shaking with disbelief. "About what?" The man's gaze faltered. "I'm not who I said I was," he confessed, his voice heavy with guilt. "I've been working for them, the ones who've been watching you. I thought I could help you, that I could keep you safe, by giving you what you wanted, your mother's life. But I've made a deal with them, and they're not the kind of people who allow debts to go unpaid." Lila recoiled, feeling as though the ground had been ripped out from under her. The man, the one who had appeared as their savior, had been using them all along. "No," she whispered, the words barely leaving her lips. "You said you wanted to help us, ... You said you were trying to save us." He looked down, his eyes avoiding hers. "I thought I was helping you," he said quietly. "I believed I was. But now they're coming. They're going to take her. Take both of you. I'm sorry. I never meant for it to go this far." Lila's head spun. Betrayal. It was the only word that seemed to echo in her mind, drowning out all the other thoughts, all the other fears. The man had lied to her, and now the very forces he had warned her about were about to descend on them. She felt betrayed by every word he had spoken, every moment of comfort he had offered. The man who had once been their only hope was now the one who had set them up for destruction. Before Lila could respond, before she could confront him with the anger and pain boiling inside her, a distant sound reached her ears, a low rumble, like the thunder of a storm on the horizon. It was a sound that didn't belong. It wasn't just the wind. It was the sound of something much bigger, something that moved with intent, with purpose. It was the sound of danger, closing in fast. "They're here," the man said, his voice low, filled with dread. "I've led them right to you. I never wanted it to end like this, but you've been marked, and there's no escaping them now." Lila felt a rush of panic flood her chest. Her thoughts raced, trying to piece together the situation, but there was no time. She had to act. She had to protect her mother. She had to escape. "Run," the man whispered, his voice desperate. "You have to get her out of here. I'll hold them off, but you need to go. Now." Lila's mind was spinning. Betrayal, anger, and fear collided into a chaotic storm. But there was no time for questions, no time for anger. All that mattered now was survival. Her mother's life, her own life, everything was at risk. "Come with me," Lila demanded, her voice steady, despite the fear raging within her. "We're not leaving you behind. We'll face this together." But the man's expression darkened, and he shook his head. "You don't understand. If you stay with me, you'll both be dead before morning. I'll do everything I can to slow them down, but you have to go now." Lila hesitated for a moment, her heart torn between the man she had trusted and the burning need to protect her mother. And then, without another word, she turned and ran. The ground seemed to shake beneath her feet as she fled toward her home. The man's words still rang in her ears, but there was no time for reflection. She had made a choice, and she was running with it. There would be no turning back. Behind her, the man's voice echoed through the night. One final warning. "Don't trust anyone, Lila, not even me." The sound of the storm grew louder. A new beginning. The night was heavy, suffocating in its silence as Lila sprinted through the narrow winding paths leading back to the house. Her breath came in ragged gasps, her heart pounding in her chest. Behind her, the darkened forest seemed to whisper with the wind, like something unseen was watching, waiting. She could still hear the man's voice, echoing in her mind. "Don't trust anyone, Lila, not even me." It was as though the words had planted themselves deep within her, rooting into her every thought, twisting them into an inescapable knot of doubt and fear. He had betrayed them, and yet, had he truly? Was there more to the story? Could he have been forced into this? Lila couldn't understand it. She wanted answers, but there was no time to search for them. The danger was real. The threat was closing in, and her only focus now was getting her mother to safety. Ahead, the dim light of the small cottage flickered in the distance. She could see the silhouette of her mother, standing in the doorway, waiting for her, a figure of fragile hope in a world that had turned against them. "Mom," Lila called, her voice hoarse with urgency. Her mother's weak form appeared in the doorway. A mix of relief and confusion etched on her face. "Lila, what's happening? Why are you running?" Lila didn't answer immediately. She reached her mother's side, pulling her into an embrace that was more for her own reassurance than anything else. "We have to go," she said, her voice tight. "We don't have time. They're coming. The man. He led them here." The confusion in her mother's eyes deepened, but she said nothing. Instead, she nodded weakly, too weak to argue, but Leela could see the fear in her gaze. She could feel it too. Leela grabbed her mother's hand and began to pull her away from the house. The world outside felt like it was closing in on them, the walls of the village shrinking with each step. The distant rumble from before, the sound of something ominous and powerful, was growing louder. It wasn't just the wind anymore, it was a presence, a force that was heading straight for them. "Where are we going?" her mother asked, her voice small but filled with the instinct to survive. "What are we running from?" Lila didn't have a clear answer. Her mind was spinning. Too many questions, too many conflicting emotions to make sense of any of it. The betrayal, the strange promises, the looming threat, everything was a blur. But there was one truth that cut through the chaos. They had to survive, and they would do whatever it took. "We're leaving," Leela said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I don't know where we'll go, but we have to leave now." Her mother stumbled beside her, her weakened body barely able to keep pace. Lila's heart ached at the sight, but she couldn't stop. They had no choice. If they stayed here, they'd die. The man had warned her. They were marked, and the ones hunting them would not rest until they were found. Suddenly, the air shifted. Lila felt that the temperature dropped, and the hairs on her arms stood on end. A cold wind swept through the trees, carrying with it a strange, almost metallic scent. The ground beneath her feet seemed to tremble, and for a fleeting moment, she thought she heard voices distant, but unmistakable, like whispers carried on the wind. Her pulse quickened. "We're too late," she whispered, almost to herself. Her mother looked at her, confusion turning into panic. "What do you mean, too late? What's coming?" Leela's eyes scanned the darkness ahead, but she couldn't see anything. The threat was coming, but from where? The whispers were louder now, cutting through the air with an unnerving clarity. Then, suddenly, there was a sharp crack sound, like branches snapping under a heavy weight, and the earth trembled violently beneath them. A figure emerged from the shadows, tall and cloaked in a shimmering darkness, a presence that seemed to warp the air around it. Lila's breath hitched in her chest as the figure stepped forward. Its form like a shadow given life, its movements fluid and unnatural. "Run!" Leela shouted, shoving her mother ahead of her. They needed to move, to get away, but her legs felt heavy as if the very ground beneath them was resisting their escape. Her mother stumbled and fell, and Lila rushed to help her up, but in that moment, the figure stepped closer, its presence overwhelming. "Who are you?" Lila shouted, her voice filled with a mix of fear and defiance. The figure paused, its face hidden beneath a hood of dark mist, but Lila felt its gaze on her, cold and penetrating. It didn't answer her question, but instead, its voice boomed in the air, vibrating her very bones. "You've made a mistake, child. You thought you could run, thought you could escape the inevitable, but the choice has been made. You are marked, and now you belong to us." Lila's blood ran cold as the words rang in her ears. "Marked. Stay back," Lila screamed, stepping in front of her mother, trying to shield her from the dark figure. Her hands trembled, and her body felt like it was made of stone, paralyzed by the weight of the figure's presence. "You are the key," the figure continued, its voice as cold as the abyss. "The serum, your mother's gift. It is all that we need." "No," Leela whispered, shaking her head. "You won't have her." The figure tilted its head slightly, its voice colder than before. "You have no say in the matter, child. You do not understand what you've awakened." Leela's mind raced. The serum, the gift, her mother's gift. The man had mentioned something about her mother's power being rare. Something that could heal, something that others wanted. But now it was clear this was no ordinary illness. This wasn't just a sickness that needed healing. This was a part of something far darker, something that wanted to use her mother's abilities for its own twisted purposes. Leela clenched her fists, feeling a surge of defiance. She had no idea what was happening, but one thing was certain: She would not let her mother fall into the hands of whatever this was. She wouldn't let them take her. Not without a fight. With one final, desperate breath, Lila reached into the folds of her clothing and pulled out the small dagger she had kept hidden. It was nothing against the dark force in front of her, but it was all she had left. "Stay back," Lila shouted again, her voice cracking. To her surprise, the figure hesitated, as if her defiance had caught it off guard. For the first time, the figure's dark presence seemed to waver. It shifted slightly, almost imperceptibly, and for a moment, Lila felt the weight of the world lift just slightly from her shoulders. But then, as quickly as the opening appeared, the figure advanced once more. Its voice thundered through the air. "Foolish girl, you cannot fight fate." Lila didn't know what to do. The dagger seemed so small, so powerless, against the darkness that loomed before her. She wanted to run, but there was nowhere to go. The figure's power surrounded them like a cage. Just as she thought she would be overwhelmed, a sudden noise, sharp and crackling, split the air. A beam of light cut through the darkness like a sword, striking the figure and sending it reeling back with a shriek. Lila's heart skipped a beat. Who was that who had come to their rescue? The figure staggered, its form distorting, flickering like a shadow in a storm. Then, the manthus stranger appeared out of nowhere, his face set in grim determination. He was holding something in his hand, a device Lila couldn't recognize, but it was emitting a brilliant light that pushed the figure back further with each pulse. "You," the figure hissed, its form shimmering violently. "You dare." "I dare," the man interrupted, his voice cold and steady. "You're not taking them?" "Not while I'm still breathing." Lila's breath caught in her throat. Had he really come to save them? After everything? But before she could ask, the man's eyes flicked to Lila, and in them, she saw a deep, sorrowful understanding. "It's not over yet," he said quietly, almost to himself, "but we've won this round." Lila's head spun. What had he meant by that? And just as quickly as he had appeared, the man turned and pulled her and her mother toward the shadows, leading them away from the danger, leading them toward something that neither of them could yet comprehend. As they disappeared into the night, the dark figure's voice echoed in the distance, a chilling promise hanging in the air. This isn't over, not by a long shot. And with that, Lila knew that their journey, whatever it was only just beginning.